Can you understand me? If you can't, I'm going to look pretty stupid.
Yes, I understand, but you still look pretty stupid.
Welcome to Aussie August, where I, an American, experience the land down under from afar by reviewing 3 of the most Australian games I could find. Last time we covered Straya, which, more or less was a getting killed by animals simulator with a twist. We'll see if our title for today offers a different view of that great southern land. My name is Harvey Bodega, and welcome to The Adventures of Down Under Dan. The Adventures of Down Under Dan is a point-and-click adventure game released in 1995 in Australia and the United Kingdom. Power Vision was a small studio mostly led by Jeff Wilke, involving his father, his wife, and his 2 sons also in the process. It gives the 2 games they created an endearing home video feeling. Due to only creating these 2 games and not making it out of the 90s, both are now abandonware, and you can play them either from a very rare and likely expensive eBay listing, you can emulate them, or from The Collection Chamber, a website dedicated to making abandonware games available and packaged so that they'll run well on modern systems. While 1997's Trev to the Rescue is more of a family caper, Power Vision's first title really leaned into all things Australian, perfect for what I'm doing here.
Good to see you again, Dan.
Yeah, same here, Strop.
Nice plane.
According to the bank, the only part I own is the air and the tyres. Well, I've only got one more stop to make, and I'm out of work.
I don't know if it's true, but I've heard stories of an opal strike up at 15 Mile Ridge. Apparently, they're pulling out black opals as big as golf balls.
Gee, one of those babies and I could buy my own jumbo jet. 15 Mile Ridge, here I come.
As you can see, Dan is a down-on-his-luck bush pilot, and hopes he can strike it rich so he can own more than just the air and the tires of his airplane. We have ourselves a pure Aussie caper here, and I figured I should offer some context as to where my appreciation for Australian culture came from. Living here in the States, I didn't get a ton of Australian exposure growing up, but I loved The Crocodile Hunter, specials on the Great Barrier Reef, zoo books on Aussie wildlife, early Australian episodes of The Dollop like with Will Anderson or Justin Hamilton, The Holden Ute. Look at that thing. I love it. Nicole Kidman, Hugh Jackman. How about Cate Blanchett? It is crazy to me. She's Australian and not actually Elvish. But it was really the Aussie sense of humor that hooked me. Irreverent, dry, and playfully whimsical. If you've ever played online games with Australians, you know what I mean. The Adventures of Down Under Dan really encapsulate this humor really well.
The sky is as empty as a politician's promise.
I mean no harm.
I don't care.
As you can see, I'm somewhat disabled.
Why do they call you Mad Mike?
I don't know. Do you, Mike? No, mate. Got no idea.
So you kind of got the idea of what to expect here, but let's jump back to where the gameplay actually starts. This is one of those old multiple cursor adventure games, and we'll talk about that more in the gameplay section, but you can observe or use a lot of spaces, typically prompting different voiced responses.
What's a nice guy like me doing in a game like this?
It's really charming, but soon after exploring your plane, disaster strikes.
I don't believe it. The world's only flying emu. And I have to crash into it at 35,000 feet. Must be my lucky day.
Lights are flashing, alarms are blaring. You gotta get out of this plane. Grabbing a first aid kit, a knife, a parachute, and...
A slab of whatchamacallit lies against the plane's rear door.
yeah, this is actually a boogie board. Well, you bail out, and you have to dodge pelicans by surfing. As the ground approaches, you put on your parachute, and you land into a tree. Shortly afterward, Down Under Dan predicts the beginning of most games in the 2000s, as when Dan cuts himself loose from the parachute, he falls to the ground and loses his memory. What is to follow is 4 in-game days as Dan adventures down under. Will he make his fortune? Will he get murdered by various wildlife? We'll have to see. By this point, I think it's clear that the presentation is very rough. Yes, it's from 1995, and you can say it's very unfair to compare The Adventures of Down Under Dan to Lost Eden, a 1995 point-and-click adventure game I just played 2 reviews ago, because that one had a whole team and a whole production process, and Jeff Wilke was kind of grabbing friends and family to make Down Under Dan. I'll agree, that's not fair. Unfortunately, it doesn't make it look any better, though. More comparable to the original DOS release of Amazon Trail, which came out 2 years earlier. Just give it a chance. Don't hate on it. There's some good stuff here. I mean, not a ton, but there's some things to highlight. The way this works is most backgrounds are actual digitalized photographs. You walk into a shop at one point and you can literally see Valvoline signs at the top. There's photos of Uluru, Wave Rock, you have a true Aussie farm, etc. But this is great for experiencing Australia from afar, for Aussie August. What could be better than actual photographs of fully functioning Australian stuff? Combined with these photo backdrops are photographic sprites. And I know FMV is not everybody's favorite. It looks goofy, especially when paired with specifically gamey stuff, but I find that things like Dan and the pigs are really neat and more or less well animated. That said, condensing a photograph with a ton of detail into a low-res pixel art backdrop can be confusing as details get very muddled. What is that? Is that something that was in the photograph that I can't understand anymore? Is this something to pick up? Am I going to be pixel hunting for stuff like this? You won't know at first, and the loss of detail can be very confusing. Like for instance, you've got this house here, some chickens running around. What you don't know is that there's actually a door to the barn right here. You can barely tell as there's sort of a pixel art version of a light shining into it, but it really gets lost in translation more or less. I like the cutscenes a lot though. They're occasionally super long, like there's this shearing sheep cutscene which takes forever, and you can clearly tell that this is real sheep shearing and Jeff really knows what he's doing. Like, what is this thing? This sort of sling that he's in to protect his back or something? I don't know, but that's real shit. Other cutscenes are just good fun. Sure, it's cheesy and goofy and probably poorly acted, but adds a lot of fair dinkum Aussie character. If that's where this game started and ended, I think I would have a lot more positive to say. Sure, the photographs and the FMV have some downsides, but, they're good, they're appealing. Where this really struggles is when paired with hand-keyed art assets, and they are terribly out of place. You walk to an area which is clearly a pair of Australian shops. Like, this is a photograph, but pub? This is especially rough with things that are animated. Look at the kangaroo, which has photographic sprites compared to the snake or the Tasmanian tiger. While being far from aesthetic, what makes this problematic is that you don't know what you're looking at. Dan can describe a lot of things to add more information, which is really helpful in a lot of cases. How about this one where you collect kangaroo fur, but it just looks like Australia for some reason? I mean, I get that, that's kind of funny, but I need to know what this is. Observing doesn't always work though. How about right here? You see this black blob? It looks like a hole. You observe it?
Nothing abnormal about that.
That doesn't tell me anything. Alright, I'll walk over to it.
Stone the crows, I feel weightless.
And now I've soft-locked myself. We'll get back to the gameplay ramifications, but you can see how this can get frustrating. While the FMV and photographs are a little goofy and out of place and highly compressed, they're downright beautiful compared to this alternative pixel art. On the audio side, I assumed that this homemade type production would have crap audio, but it really wasn't so bad. Sure, several of the normal sounds are pretty bad. Okay, I got a kick out of that last one. But nothing was grating. They're all fitting, and I was wondering if they picked up a lot of these sounds on location in these places. Music, however, was downright charming. The soundtrack was composed by Paul Coombs, who is also Dan's voice actor and Strop's actor. It's rudimentary and there's not a lot of it, as there's many scenes that won't have music at all, but it does push the presentation forward quite a bit. I initially really liked the dirge that plays when you die, but you just hear it a lot. You've heard a lot of the voice acting already. It's unprofessional, occasionally stilted, but it's lighthearted fun. Shit just kind of happens, but Dan almost always has something funny to say about it.
What about an arm wrestle? Huh? What do you reckon?
No problem. I was undefeated champ at Ghost Gum Creek High.
Get down and boogie down!
So this is what economy class is like.
The voice acting feels like a children's television show. They're overacting and being whimsical, and it's setting a fun tone. It'll be playful, self-deprecating, but occasionally be shockingly violent in all of its pixelated glory.
Gravity has a lot to answer for.
This homemade bedroom production adds a lot of character, Australian culture, and is overall very endearing. However, the visual presentation is very ugly, with some charming FMV, while the music adds a lot and the voice acting is delightful. I'll circle back and mention that comparing Lost Eden's presentation to The Adventures of Down Under Dan is unfair. However, gameplay mechanics are absolutely up for criticism. I have now covered 4 90s adventure games, Lost Eden and Garage Bad Dream Adventure also being point and clicks. Would the Amazon Trail technically be a point and click? I'll say 2.5 of the 4. I complimented most of these titles for effective but non-handholdy hint systems, and avoiding the genre's frustrations of the era. Things like illogical puzzles, the adventure game Purgatory, unexpected deaths, pixel hunting, which overall makes their gameplay age much better. Meanwhile, Down Under Dan is a masterclass in bad 90s gameplay mechanics. I'm going to explain and somewhat rant about the way that Down Under Dan is inaccessible and falls into all of these pitfalls, but I want to say up front, there is a way to make the experience way less punishing. Notoriously dated but not offensively so, The Adventures of Down Under Dan has 6 cursors. Observe, interact, move, use your active inventory item, I forgot speak, and a setting that allows the movement to follow where the cursor is, which I never used if I could avoid it. Sure, multiple cursors are outdated even at the time and somewhat tedious, but not painfully so. It's better than the verb panel, and thankfully there are no combining items within the inventory, so there's some mercy there. That said, these basic functions of the game lead into a lot of frustrations. Let's start with navigation. You use the move cursor to go to a spot, right? You want to go to the next area, you have to click in an area that will trigger the transition to the next screen. Now, Lost Eden had its little spinning dice thing, indicating where you were about to go, but mostly it was just the edges of the screen, north, south, east, west, that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, Garage, which had a much more complicated layout, had literal arrows to point where you were going to go. Down Under Dan doesn't do that. How about this farm screen? Where do you think you can go? I'd guess south, east, and west, right? Maybe multiple places to the west? Let me map out how it actually works. This whole area gets you to the house. Over here takes you to some pigs. Down in these 2 directions loops you around with some ironic dialogue. Down here takes you to some woods, and all the way up here, just in this one northern little section, takes you to some rabbit-infested rocks. Remember that barn door I complained about? How likely is it that you don't know that just this little area right here is that barn door, while down here will take you to those pigs I mentioned earlier? How about inside the barn door, without any inclination, there's another room to the right? How would I know that? It's so easy to miss something, and clicking too wantonly will have you experiencing another curse of 90s adventure games, random deaths with long unskippable cutscenes. Take this cliff. It looks like a dead end, but if you go anywhere except back to the west, you'll fall to a surprisingly gruesome death. Plus, the transition to the death screen is kinda long and not skippable until you see this screen. What makes it more frustrating is there is a path up and to the left here, but how likely are you to stumble across it after dying so spectacularly, unless you are really frustrated and just grasping at straws? There is a hint if you observe the cliff, but observing doesn't always help, as we talked about with that hole earlier. It's clunky, the movement is really stiff, and somehow they add in platforming. I already stink at platformers, but doing it in this interface is really strange. You have these moving panels or crocodile heads you have to jump on, which when you click to jump to a specific spot, you have to wait until the hilarious jumping animation finishes to see where you're going to land, and if where you want to land hasn't moved since the animation finished. On top of that, there's a specific order you have to jump on these, and if you do it in the wrong one, you get eaten by a crocodile. All of this is trial and error, and it can get really annoying. How about from the other side of the river? Be honest with me, would you think to just swim across? Why would I assume that? I've been dancing around it, but this touches on 3 pervasive issues that intimately tie together. Trial and error, random deaths, soft locks. Naturally, you want to avoid dying, but trial and error is heavily required to advance, which will kill you a lot in many instances. There's a rock wall you have to climb, and you get a map to show where you're supposed to jump so you don't fall to your death. That said, the paths change every time, and 3 paths are provided instead of 1, with only 1 actually working. Why have 3 paths? I've talked a lot about how dying can be frustrating, and it's clear as to why, but I will admit sometimes it can be hilarious. And like Harvester or other games like that, sometimes you'd find yourself choosing the fatal option just to see what would happen. This is particularly Australian gallows humor, which somehow harmonizes with how fatal 90s adventure games were. However, engaging in trial and error with the consistent threat of a soft lock is just too much. I mentioned falling into the maze earlier. This is an area you have to navigate later, but you won't have the item to do so yet. It's already an issue that there is a maze. I hate mazes. And Down Under Dan's maze has different areas of the map using the same picture, so it's super easy to get lost. Let's say you fell down the hole like I talked about earlier. This is a massive, massive maze with a lot of areas to explore, and you won't know that you actually can't win now. You have to reload. This is a concept I've mentioned in several videos that I call the adventure game purgatory. You're unable to progress, but you don't know it. It's very easy to experience in Down Under Dan, and any time that this can happen, I will always consider it poor game design. Overall, it's a very frustrating process. There are somewhat illogical puzzles that you have to trial and error for, resulting in constant deaths and possible soft locks. Making this worse is that many of these segments then repeat, most annoyingly the maze, the rocks, and the river platforming. I have not shared my most frustrated moment yet. I'm not ready to. I'll come back to it in a minute, but let's talk some things that I liked about the gameplay. Most of these are going to be some softball compliments, but I gotta start somewhere. Despite having all other 90s adventure game pitfalls, Down Under Dan has almost no pixel hunting. That's a really backhanded compliment. You sucked in all these other ways, but you didn't suck in this one way, and that's good. But I'm just thankful for any mercy at this point. How about that Down Under Dan attempts a variety of alternative game mechanics? That's pretty cool with such a small team. You have that warped platforming, arcade shooter segments, timed puzzles like riding Wave Rock to grab a snake before it bites you and you die from poison. It's a cool attempt. I appreciate it, swing for the fences, and most of these weren't that painful. Beyond that, making this survivable is that you can save at any time and have a ton of different save slots, which I highly encourage using if you're gonna engage in this endeavor. A truly helpful addition is there's an in-depth hint system. As you move around, Dan accumulates hint points, which you can use in an alphabetized hint system. Each letter represents an additional hint. Some of these hints are frustratingly obtuse, while others are shockingly direct, and some just fill in the blanks for poor game design. Remember that door to the right in the barn? Yep, there's a hint telling you that there's a door there. This hint system is not what I was referring to when I said there's a way to make Down Under Dan a lot less punishing earlier. I'll get to that in a moment. This is a necessity to make this game even playable sometimes. I'm happy it's there, it's just a consolation prize. That brings us to my most frustrated moment. Are you ready? After not falling in the hole, you collect 10 sticks, start a campfire with a smoldering stick, and sleep through the night. Of course, if you have any less than 10 sticks, your fire burns out and you freeze to death, but that's not what I'm talking about. Following surviving and waking up, an entire in-game day will play out. You meet a family where the dad is afflicted by having a second head, and he asks you to shear his sheep. In order to do so, you have an incredibly long stint involving tons of quests from shooting rabbits to going into town and buying shearing equipment to repairing a dirt bike, all to muster the sheep in preparation for shearing. After shearing this two-headed asshole sheep, you go report your handiwork to him.
Hi, Jack. I finished the shearing, mate.
You bumbling great fool. Half the lamb's dehydrated.
I'm sorry.
Get out and stay out.
Oh, sure is dark out in the bush at night. And cold. I think I'll just freeze to death now.
What did I do wrong? I wander around, click through the hints, get frustrated, and finally just looked up a guide. What I found drove me nuts. Mustering the sheep and then leaving to buy your equipment will leave the sheep dehydrated, causing this cutscene. I didn't even do that though, I already had everything. However, that's not the only way to get that cutscene and lose. Back when I slept and used those 10 sticks, I left my campfire burning. While this may seem like an incredibly irresponsible move, Smokey the Bear would have me looking like DiCaprio from The Revenant, or at least Smokey the Drop Bear. The truth is, I interacted with the fire, I used the use command on it, and nothing happened. The horrible truth is that you have to use the navigate or move button on it. Then Dan will jump and stomp it out. I spent so long in this adventure game purgatory, an entire in-game day, having already lost. You want to know the key to making Down Under Dan tolerable? My secret that I mentioned earlier? Use a guide. I know there's hate out there for walkthrough users. I don't think it should be something that you initially start with, but I insist to beat or even enjoy this game. Use a guide. It's for your own good. I'm doing this for you. Obviously, I dislike the gameplay in Down Under Dan, but all the mechanics themselves are tolerable for the especially patient, if and only if you use a guide. Alright, so visuals were mostly rough, and discussing the gameplay mechanics involved way more ranting than I ever like doing. Can the story redeem Down Under Dan? Last we left off, our intrepid hero was a broke, amnesiac, planeless pilot who's lost out in the bush somewhere. The next segment of the story I referred to quite a bit. You wander around, grab some stuff, make a fire, go to sleep, wake up, and do a huge series of tasks to shear this guy's sheep. I love the way Nicole greets Dan when he first walks up.
What do you think you're doing just waltzing into my house like that? I'm too busy to be chasing trespassers.
And you get her to agree to allowing you to work there after feeding her animals. That's when you find out Jack, the one who normally runs this place, has taken ill.
Did someone say something, disease?
I thought this was a joke meaning he was lazy and didn't listen, but it was really that he'd grown another fucking head. After speaking with him and doing all those quests and shearing the sheep correctly and not leaving the fire burning, he lets you stay there for a night and more or less hires you. Next morning though, you gotta go talk to Jack and you find out his prized bull is missing. I mean it when I say it that finding and returning this bull will take you through time and space and have you talking to a lot more NPCs. One of which is this Aboriginal Australian fellow named Reg, and another is this crazy Scottish guy named Mad Mike. Now Mad Mike is the most important person in this game, basically a mad inventor guy. His inventions are going to be vitally important to winning this game. First of which is
a wildlife translator.
A wildlife translator. You talk to a kangaroo missing her Joey.
You better believe it. You really do look stupid.
You return the Joey to her. She tells you that Mad Mike has this crazy time travel machine in the cave system we were looking at earlier. Inputting certain codes will take you to certain places and times in history. Frustratingly, you have to input the code by walking through the entire maze and hit specific buttons that are spread all over the place and on 2 different levels, separated by the fall through the
corrugated iron.
But you get a code from a kangaroo and from a wombat that you give yams to. These will take you to different places, but the first one you gotta get to is this A253 code sheet. Walking through and inputting A253, we go through one of my favorite transitions in this entire game.
Always wanted to get ahead in life, but this is ridiculous. I've heard of going down the gurgler, but this is too much. Wow, no jet lag.
Look where we are. Look at that. We get ourselves a boomerang, we speak to a rapping koala.
You see, there's no doubt that this drought could drive my favorite eucalyptus leaves out.
Well, that's all I need, a rapping koala.
But what we're looking for is this bone, like we're desecrating a corpse of a native person. It's probably not okay, but the Australian Aboriginal guy is the guy who told us to do it. You leave the cave system.
All the right parts, but in the wrong places. God, how am I going to scratch me
You give the bone to Reg.
Liverpool.
Here we go, here we go, here we go.
And you go over to the rocks where all those rabbits usually hang out. You boomerang the snake there. You jump to this really specific rock. You get the boogie board flying around in a time segment that is actually really difficult. You use the cord on the bull, which I hope you grabbed from the parachute all the way earlier, and go report to Jack that you found his bull. Now you're getting a taste of what the story of this is like. It's a series of disjointed vignettes with weird shit that happens, funny dialogue, and pretty illogical activities. I'm going to put the spoiler warning up here, probably about halfway through the story, so if you don't want to see what happens to Dan in this bizarre caper and want to experience it for yourself, jump forward to the time on screen now. Alright, I have a sneaking suspicion that very few people skipped this segment, so let's get through it. The next segment involves working your way through the maze and inputting the next code that you got from the koala, 2369. Why are we doing this? Why did we get a bone for Reg? Why are we traveling through time? Why are we spending so much time in this stupid maze? We want to cure Jack of his affliction. Believe it or not, curing this is not as easy as it may seem, but our friend Reg has the recipe for the cure. It involves
Redback spider,
No problems.
black snake venom,
Dangerous stuff.
red kangaroo fur eye,
Yeah, I saw one recently.
Tasmanian tiger saliva, mate.
That's tricky, since they've been extinct for over 50 years.
Thus you see the need for time travel. Anyway, this time you swipe Nicole's eucalyptus oil, you use the wildlife translator on the kookaburra, blah 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 blah. You know, I'm going to skip forward and say that you later end up in a pub and try to arm wrestle a drunk guy there. You get your butt kicked, but then go talk to your boy Mad Mike again, and he said he's been growing this magic tree called the Mighty Tree that makes you very strong for a temporary amount of time.
That was tasty. The strangest thing though, I've got this incredible urge to moonwalk.
Cool. You go win the arm wrestling competition and talk to the barmaid, giving her a ring, who gives you a book.
Here, take this book that old Don the prospector left here. When you've time to read it, you might pick up some clues.
You time travel 2 times. First time to get a black snake, second time to go back to Ayers Rock, Uluru, and tranquilize a kangaroo. Now you only get 2 tranquilizer shells, and if you miss one, you just lost the game. Don't do that. Make sure you hit the kangaroo, only use one, and get some of its fur. You give eucalyptus oil to the koala so he can moisten his leaves or whatever.
Hey, before you make a swift retreat, take with you this old code sheet.
And you travel back to the present. The next segment is really difficult because it involves you shooting a whole bunch of spiders and bats within the cave system. You put in the next code, 2047, and I am so thankful I was using a guide at this point. You gotta find a specific place to hide. The screen you have to hide on is nondescript, but you gotta find a specific spot, then wait and have Dan choose to hide. He'll have some dialogue.
This looks like a good place to hide.
Once you stay there long enough, a Tasmanian tiger approaches. I hope you didn't waste your other tranquilizer shell because now's the time to use it. You tranquilize him, go find him, and now you have ingredients from a kangaroo, a Tasmanian tiger, a black snake, and you travel back to the present to catch a redback spider. You give all this stuff to Reg, of course with the desecrated bone, okay? He makes your cocktail, and you take it and give it to Jack.
Wow.
No, that's the cure. That's what's supposed to happen. Anyway, you fix Jack, he's now healthy or whatever.
I'm cured!
In thanks, he gives you an opal detector, which I assume is like a metal detector specifically for opals, but is a remote-controlled car. You have to drive this car around a very specific screen and find opals without getting eaten by termites. Yes, these are man-eating termites. With the opals, you go back to the pub and give them to the drunk guy.
I won't be needing this anymore. It's me last stick of dynamite.
In conjunction with the book you were given and other resources you've collected along your way, you're able to now go back to the frickin' maze again, go to a different screen, and use your knife to pry open a thin wall. Creating a hole with the knife, you then use your newly acquired dynamite to blow open the whole area. Going through your newly created gap, you're now boogie boarding again. There's a full Amazon Trail segment, I'm having flashbacks to crashing canoes, I'm worried about crocodiles, and I reach an entirely gold dust beach.
Yeehaw!
Dan celebrates, moonwalking.
Always hope I'd retire to palm trees and golden beaches. I just never imagined it'd be this far off the beaten track.
And credits roll. I'm sure both the story and my explanation of the story feel disjointed, incomplete, and not entirely logical. The plot has a lot of character with goofy voice lines and fun lightheartedness. There's a lot of fun Australian slang and accents and funny things happening. There's just a lot of weird shit in this story. One of the codes you get for Mad Mike's travel machine is just coughed up by Dan, randomly. The two-headedness. The fact that Dan actually lost his memory when he fell out of the tree and then just randomly gets it back, but it doesn't change the story in any way.
I've even got my memory back. After I cure Jack, I'm gonna continue my quest for wealth.
There's the Aboriginal Australian, I don't think played by an Aboriginal person. I'm sure it's in pretty bad taste. And again, why do the gators only work one way? Why? The ending is not at all satisfying, but the experience of the story and the goofy little Australian vignettes were what I enjoyed most about it. At this point, I'll welcome back our spoiler avoiders. The thing is, Down Under Dan's story does not redeem the frustrations of the gameplay and the rudimentarianism? How simple the presentation is. Like most things in this game, it has a lot of character though, so there's a lot to appreciate in that regard. To bring this all together, I'll say The Adventures of Down Under Dan is a fun, whimsical, lighthearted, incredibly rudimentary, and overwhelmingly frustrating experience, only made reasonable by the extensive use of a guide and requiring a high taxation of your patience. Creating an indie game is an incredibly respectable and difficult thing to have done back in the mid-90s. It's amazing Jeff, his family members, his friends were able to put together this project. I really enjoyed the humor, I really enjoyed the character, but that almost certainly does not make it worth recommending. In scoring in each of my categories and compiling into a grade, The Adventures of Down Under Dan scored between Hinterland and Monster's Den Godfall in the tier only for the deeply uncommonly interested. Why is this is pretty clear so far. The gameplay is oppressive, the visuals are highly rudimentary, and the fun humor and endearing aspects of the writing are not enough to overcome that, so why only for the deeply uncommonly interested and not in the category I don't recommend at all? Well, I think it's fair to say that I am the deeply uncommonly interested in this case. I'm a person looking to experience Australian culture through video games, and this is perfect for me. Now, I was super frustrated and I thought about not finishing at parts, but I had a decent time. It's not the most excruciating thing I've ever played. It is free if you choose to stumble across it online, or if you use the collection chamber, which is already packaged and runs really well on modern systems. But I will say, even in using your time and not spending any money, there are a lot of other games you could play. With that, thank you so much for watching. This is video 2 of 3 for Aussie August. My name is Harvey Bodega, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot.
This is from Matilda. Shit.